Okay, so as I mentioned in the intro, you have your app assets tab, and this is mapped to a directory in the file system. If you open up the installation under Crudzilla apps, and then under Crudzilla, that's the asset directory. It's where all your work is stored. Um, So the first thing I guess you would want to do in any development environment is to actually create an application, and the way you do that in this environment is actually quite straightforward as in any other environment. First, you decide where you want the app to be stored. As you can see, we have I'm currently using the what is basically the Java naming convention, which is com that some organization, and then you can descend further down to organize your apps. So let's say we want to create a new app. You click on Crudzilla. Is the app for the Crudzilla organization, and you say create new web app, and this would give you um, this box here, the pop-up box. You can put in a name, and then you have a choice to specify a data source. Um, you have two choices for creating for specifying data sources. You can drag and drop a data source object here, um, which we will get into. There's a way to create data source objects, which is basically just a way to create an object and provide the information for connecting to an external database. Or you can specify a name for your database, for your application's database, and a database will be created for you within this environment. The product comes with the Derby database management system, which is a Java database management system, and it's easy to use that as a starting point for your application. So let's say we want to create test application, and we're going to create a corresponding database for test application. And when you do this, you have the choice to then say, I want authentication tables to be created for me. Um, this just creates a set of tables that will allow your application to support authentication right out of the uh, once it's created. You don't have to do any additional work to support that functionality. If you don't if you don't check this or you don't specify a database, it will create the application without supporting authentication, in which case you'll have to do that manually. So, we'll check this and just create go. That's it. It's going to take a while for it to generate all the boilerplate artifacts to support your application from the start. And another thing you should notice, the application creation process is a bit sluggish. It might take a minute or two to create the application, which is kind of slow. And the reason for that is because the CRUD base is a database system, and the taxonomy, excuse me, the taxonomy layer that is used to navigate the CRUD base is inherently slow. Because it's not a file-based system, whenever you want to find stuff, you basically have to navigate a bunch of nodes and look through their children until you find what you're looking for. So when you're creating an application, it's doing a whole lot of that to generate all the artifacts for you. And so that process is a bit sluggish. In the future, we are working on improving that and making it a whole lot more snappier than it currently is. But it should not really be a problem because it's not like you're going to spend your day creating applications. An app is something that you'll create occasionally and then you work on it. So that's something to look out for when you actually open the app and you try to create a new app. It will take maybe a full minute or even two, depending on how slow your computer is. Maybe that's the time to take a coffee break while the app is generated. Again, we hope we can fix that in subsequent releases of the product. So let's give this a minute. It's going to create the application fully supporting authentication, which saves you the extra work, and you can get right to creating your application by creating CRUD. So we see what happened there. The application got created, and it opened up in a tab for us automatically, and it asked us to log in. So we're going to log in here. By default, the password and username is developer. That's it, developer for both, and you can log in to a fully secured application. So that's the process for creating an application. I'll show you how to create a data source, just in case you decide, let's say you're using um, a MySQL database, for instance, and you want to use that instead of the embedded Derby database. Um, so I'm going to show you just quickly how you create a data source so you can use it instead of the embedded database, which we have used right now. Um, so one thing, again, another thing that you should notice when you create an app from the App Asset tab. Um, so let me navigate here and show you the application folder. So here's our test application. As you can see, it generated a whole bunch of things for us. That's just boilerplate code to get us started. And that's why it took a bit, as I was saying earlier. And it also creates a corresponding entry in the CRUD base. These are stuff that is stored in the database. It generates your application set in CRUDs. It generates stuff to support login during development, and it generates your startup code. This is a script that you can, a script template that you can, it's in Groovy, you can use it to write startup functionality. So if you have stuff that you want to, code that you want to execute when your application starts up initially, you will write the code in here. And then we'll later on get into how you set up the login environment to support login error messages for your application on the console. As far as logging goes for production, that's something that you have to configure for yourself using whichever login framework you want to use. The Crudzilla app settings, that's just your setting. It has a bunch of CRUDs in there that support configuring your new application. We'll take a look at an example of a CRUD. Again, I said I'll get into what a CRUD is in a subsequent uh, screencast. But this is an example of what a CRUD looks like, and this one represents your application setting. It's actually quite straightforward. This is the name, and these are the values. But again, it's a lot more interesting than it looks. So this we just created a new web application. I told you I'll show you how to create a data source, because that's important for especially for business applications. You basically decide, where you want the data source to be stored. You go to File, New, you right click, New, and you come here and you say Create a data source. And that let's create a test data source. Oops. I'll just show you an example of one that's already created. So this is the one that gets created by the application. As you can see, it's straightforward. It tells you the driver class name. That's the JDBC driver class name. The type of data source, it can be JDBC driver, it can be data source, or it can be JDNI. That's the Java directory naming